I'm super excited to be here. We're talking about smart segmentation. I have here Francis. Let's start off with there. Maybe Francis, you can introduce yourself to the folks who are just tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the folks who don't know me, I run the product team here at Mad Kudu, and I've worked with probably a little over probably 200 PLG companies with some amazing names from the Splunk, MongoDB, Miro, Figma, Canva, and over all those years, I've been blessed with the ability to just take in and soak in all the smartness of product and marketing leaders there, and that's kind of what's led to Mad Kudu. So I'm really excited to be here today and share some of the learnings that I've taken from all those conversations, and potentially putting a spin on what to look out for in 2024 based on conversations I've had.
Nice.
I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat. So I'm sure you're going to say the same, but people, please, the goal is not for. I don't want to listen to myself. So if you guys have questions, please shoot them in the chat or in the questions tab, and we'll be more than happy to pick those up.
Yeah, same. Totally agree. I think if people want to chat, if they have questions, just drop it in. I'll show it on the screen. I'm Rami John, content director at AppKeys. AppKeys is an easy way to create no-code experiences for onboarding and in-app messages. Easy way to help measure and improve your product adoption without a developer. I'm a big fan of segmentation. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I wrote a book called Product-Led Onboarding for people not familiar, and I call segmentation as I might be giving away too much, but it really is a cheat code to success for onboarding and product-led. And super excited to be here with Francis and share all of his knowledge. I'm going to start off and talk a little bit about why segmentation is important, and then Francis will share a few examples and how it applies to more complex things, especially for B2B. And then we're going to go through some examples, even more examples. So really the whole goal of this is for you to take away some concepts and apply it to your product-led growth motion and really improve your product adoption. You've probably already seen this whole shift in the way people buy and use software. This is not new. I mean, you think about the last time you bought software. Probably most likely you signed up for it, and then you wanted a free trial. I think there are some B2C example rules, so we'll be sharing that a little bit, but it would be mostly B2B focus. But we'll keep that in mind to find any B2C examples. But really, across the board, from Salesforce, Forrester, and Gladly, I think there's really been a more try before you buy. It's something that we saw at AppKeys when we did a poll for our audience a few years ago, where 90% of software buyers, they really want the free trial and freemium, and then even more so that they prefer brands that has that experience, and I'd rather buy something that they try before they buy it, particularly because it reduces the chance of the risk of you not liking what you buy. Think about the last time you bought shoes. Actually, Francis, the last time you bought shoes, you probably tried it on first, or you're gonna buy a car. You probably hopefully test drive it first, unless you really know what you want. But even then, I think that whole consumer side has really moved into more B2B space. And the challenge also with us in the software space is that the whole technology space, there's more competition. This is what it looked like in 2020, this whole marketing tech landscape. It looks very daunting and confusing. I feel like I can barely see any logos, but this is what it looks like 3 years after. Look how small that is. It went from barely seeing it to it looks like you're up high looking at ants. And that's what we have faced, where even for us at AppKeys, we're seeing more competition in our space because it's so much easier. I mean, I read something on Twitter, or now called X, where somebody was able to use ChatGPT to write code, and it was good enough. Imagine, I think it would be easier to write code that is almost functional. But I think it's important for us to see that the competition has increased, and that's resulted in more of us wanting to really make sure that it's something we can try. Like if we have more options, you'd rather go for one that gives you confidence and that you can try, rather than one that you can't really. You have to talk to somebody through it. And I think the result of all of this, with this challenge of more competition, is that retention has really tanked. I think we've seen this across the trend. This is data from Mixpanel, where 40 to even up to 80% of SaaS new users, they don't come back after day one. Like look at that retention curve there, where you see the number of days users have stuck around. For elite companies, it's even it's a little bit better, but you're still seeing like a 40 to 60% new users. And this is really going to why segmentation is important. I think for a lot of us here, we know that retention really starts off in onboarding. And if you can segment them as early as possible, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It can lead into fixing this problem. This is data from ProfitWell, where they shared that if you have a great onboarding experience, you can see like a significant improvement in retention. And I think many people have talked about this. Retention is really the heart of growth. I forgot who said it. I think Alex Schultz, he used to be VP of growth at Facebook, who said that growth is the key to retention is the key to any growth. And really, I think this is what we see here. And retention starts off with that first impression in the onboarding experience. And that's important for us to see, because if we don't nail that right away, they're not going to stick around. Now, I just want to do a quick intro of what onboarding is. I'm going to be very brief about this, but there might be some concepts here that you're familiar with, some so that we can lay the foundation for what we're going to be talking about more in a little bit. And Francesco is asking, are you referring to free trial and freemium users compared to those paying, or retention to existing paying customers? I think it's both. I think it starts off very early, where if you don't nail this free trial and freemium very early on, then they're not going to stick around for long for paying customers. This is actually something we found at AppQs, where for a significant period of time, we had a 14-day free trial where a lot of people were extending their conversion or extending their trial by paying the first month. So they would pay $100 and then they would become a paying customer, but they would cancel after that first month. So if we don't get that first impression right, they might pay for the first month, especially if you don't lock them in for a long-term period. But then they cancel out. I think it does apply to both retention.
Yeah. And I think so. And we've plotted some of these charts before with some of our customers. And yes, on the daily retention, really from a usage perspective. So this is more from a sign up, someone signing up for the trial or for the freemium. After X many days, are they still active in the product? And what we see is that the curves look pretty much like that, where you often have this massive. I mean, of course, you have 100% of people who sign up right on day zero. Then there's a pretty dramatic drop on day one because people haven't really activated the product. And so they're not going to stick with the product. I think when you look at kind of post-purchase, so retention from a paying perspective, the curve isn't as abrupt. But this is something that is very, very typical in daily retention. And maybe one thing I wanted to share before we move on, Ramli, I think if I can go back to this map, I think one really important element to take into account is that there's this famous book, The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. I highly recommend either reading it or watching his TED Talk. It's a 20-minute thing. What was really interesting is he talks about how, as a consumer, sometimes the more choice you have, the harder it becomes to make any choice. And you might feel more choice gives you more freedom because you can pick from more things. But in the end, having too much choice actually leads to not making any decision because it's too complicated. And I'll link that paradox of choice to one of my favorite books recently from country mate of Ramli, April Dunford. If you haven't read her book on I think it's Sales Pitch, I think is her last one. I, again, highly recommend. And one of the things she talks about in there is how today, what you're really competing against is not making a decision. And the reason why people end up not making a decision is because it's too hard to make a decision. And imagine how daunting of a task it is if you have to go and find some, I don't know, like accounting software for your company. You go onto G2 or let's say you need a marketing tool, right? You log into this MarTech map and you're like, oh my God, I have to choose from 150 little dots here, start a trial for each of them, and then like try and figure out how to get value and how to evaluate that. And that's where the onboarding becomes critical, because the experience that you're going to get on during the onboarding is what's going to lead you to potentially, get value, activate, and it sets you apart from the rest of the pack. So I think today more than ever, with budgets being smaller and all that stuff, I think we are seeing even more than before the need for great onboarding. And I think there's a double factor there: the paradox of choice and the fact that you're competing against doing nothing just because it's too hard to decide.
I love that. I think that's a really good point. I just dropped that link to the book you mentioned, Francis. I should buy it. I haven't read it yet. I think people, and I have sales pitch right here by April Danford. So I was like, it's in the back. So we're not sponsored by any of these people.
But we will only talk about yellow books.
Yellow books are the best. I'm a little bias. My book is yellow.
I know, that's what I was going to say.
It's so good. And Francis has a yellow shirt. Maggie said, "Thank you so much. I appreciate that." That's a good context. I think thank you for queuing me up, Francis, about the importance of onboarding. I think when we talk about onboarding, like many people have different definitions. So let me just lay the foundation of what it is and why it's important. When we think about onboarding, it's not the product tours. Surprise, surprise. It's not the checklist. When people think about onboarding, that's usually what people say. And I've heard comments like, I don't need onboarding for my product. And what they're talking about is they don't need product tours and things, which might be the case. But onboarding is actually the process of guiding new users to experience value with your product. So no matter what you think about it, users are being onboarded without you being intentional about it, and we want you to be intentional about it in this workshop that we're doing. And then April spoke. Francis, thank you. And I think the key here, and where people get wrong the most, is the word value. I think when you tell to anybody what value are you talking about, and what I imagine this is like a bridge. Like user onboarding is that bridge to like a desired outcome for a user. The best way that I've heard it described is like you're painting a picture of a promised land for your users. Like here's what the best land that's flowing with milk and honey looks like, right? And your onboarding is that bridge to guide them there to the current circumstance, to where they'd be. And that's what value is like, what does the promised land, what does the desired outcome look like for them? And getting them there is the goal of the whole onboarding experience. Well, but often, like I mentioned, it's not the product tour, it's not the just set it and forget it. It really is about getting them to that promised land. And the challenge we often have is like when people are crossing this bridge, there's this quote I love. Actually, I mentioned it quite a bit. It's from Scott Belsky. He's the chief product officer at Adobe, and it's this very harsh but very truthful, that in the first 15 seconds of every new experience, people are lazy, vain, and selfish. Now that sounds really harsh, but it's so true. Think about the last time you signed up for a product. You're probably thinking about, what is this product? Why should I use this? Why is this better than what I have right now? And you're probably wondering as well, like, how will this make me look in front of my boss if it's like, a B2B product? Or how will this look in front of my friends if it's a consumer product? There's really that social aspect that we need to address really quickly, especially with what Francis and I were talking about, the decision fatigue and the multiple choices. And if you don't grab them, if you don't really get them right away, they might not really stick around for long. And like I said, Lisa, I love this quote. I love sharing this to people because it sounds harsh, but there's real truth in it. But I think the whole point of this is like the goal that we have is how do we get them to that promised land as quickly as possible? How do we shrink that time that somebody starts seeing hears about your product, signs up for it, and experience the aha moment, how do you reduce that time to value as quickly as possible? That time that it takes for them to cross that bridge that I just mentioned earlier. And I think there's three simple goals and tips that I want to share before I pass it off to Francis to talk more about the complexity of B2B. When it comes to goals, there's three things that we really want to do with onboarding. First, we want to motivate our users, we want to guide them, and we want to educate them. And nailing this three can really help you set up your users for success, and make sure that we solve that retention problem that we talked about earlier. When it comes to motivate, it's really about like getting people to painting a picture of what the promised land as quickly as possible. So a great example of this is with MailChimp, where they really start like painting, start trying to get you to define what your business is and what is your website about, and start choosing different design elements to it. And that can really help motivate, where like there's a sense of ownership. There's this psychology principle called the IKEA effect. How many of you have bought something from IKEA and like got frustrated just building something? This IKEA effect says that if you build something, you're more likely to value it rather than something that you actually bought pre-made. And I think this is a great example with this, where like MailChimp is purposely trying to tap into you building and tapping into something to really help guide that with this. In terms of guiding users, it's really like knowing what the next steps are. Basecamp does a great example of this, where they use their product itself, where they really make it easy. I think if people don't know what the next steps are, then they'll like not stick around. And they have like easy ways to create a task and like set up stuff with that, so that they know what the next steps are. And finally,
sorry to interrupt. I want to make, because you mentioned IKEA, and so now this has like been burning my brain, because I think IKEA, there's like building the stuff that's tricky, but I used to be like, I had my growth hack of going to IKEA, right? Because like if you go to IKEA, you're supposed to follow the path, just super long, and there's like always shortcuts. Like once there's an IKEA store that you could kind of like take shortcuts. But I think there's something interesting there of like how frustrating the experience can be if you know what you're looking for, and IKEA makes you go through all the different steps. And I think there's something there about like how you personalize the onboarding journey, and making sure that you're not going through just a feature by feature. I show you all the features that we have, but rather how do you figure out what is it that this user is likely trying to do, and how do I get them as quickly as possible to that value, rather than showing them all the features that we have. And I think this is like an interesting thing to look at. Like if you map today's journey in your product and all the steps someone has to go through, I would say like ask yourself how much of your onboarding journey is like an IKEA thing, where we're driving you through all the things we want to show you, rather than all the things that you want to get. And I think, to Jason's point, I think there's big difference there between like the IKEA model, where we drive you through all the things, versus the Amazon, where you have a button. I don't know if those still exist, right? But the Amazon push stuff, where you just press on a button and you had your product show up. So I think there's something interesting there of like trying to figure out like when you like taking your product and like putting it through that lens and figuring out like which one does it look the most like.
I like that. Yeah, totally love that. I think it just to nail this even further. Like when you get a package for like a table from IKEA, they don't give you all the nails and all the screws. They don't give you all the wood, right? Like I think this is leading towards segmentation, where like they give you what you need to build that thing, rather than giving you everything you need, everything like a thousands of possible stuff in that. So, and the instructions very clear as to like, here's how to build this table, versus like, here's all the different screws that we have and all the different wood that we have. So I think I'm really queuing you up, Francis, in a bit. The last is around education. I think it's important for you to continue to educate And when I think about educate, it's not about like the traditional like grade school where like, oh, here's this, and we're really like getting into this, but like contextual education is super important. Where Grammarly, points out exactly where you learn as you need to on the fly, where you put in your text and it highlights exactly how to improve that. Um, Francis says there's always one screw left. You're right. It's like, is it an extra, or worse yet, if you're missing a screw, and that gets you in trouble. I'm going to pass it off to Francis now. Talks about how this really applies more so in B2B complexity.
Yeah, and I think now we're kind of like exiting potentially like some of the where maybe the analogy with IKEA gets a little bit more complicated, because one of the big differences in B2B versus B2C is that in B2B we're really ultimately trying to drive cross people and cross team adoption, which means that there's multiple people with different needs, different objectives, different levels of understanding of what it is we're trying to do, and we want to guide them to collective value. And one of the challenges that I see with a lot of folks out there is that because B2B, I think PLG is a little bit inherited from the B2C world. And so there's a lot of the B2C model that has been inherited in how we think about growth in B2B. And we tend to try and replicate this kind of linear way of thinking of like, someone signs up, they activate the product, they get that first value, they get recurring value, and then they start paying. Like very B2C model. And like we all know of like the examples of like, at Facebook, like that kind of activation moment was adding 10 friends in the first 7 days. And so we're looking for these metrics. But in B2B, the journey isn't that linear because we're not in a single player mode. And so what you have is you're going to have some signups that actually lead to other signups, right? Like someone signs up, they don't do anything in the product, but they start inviting a bunch of other people. And then one of these people is going to get invited and they're actually going to move straight to swiping the credit card. And that's something that doesn't really fit into the linear model. And the reason for that is generally someone has been evaluating the product. They, invite their team to get value from the product. And if you think in a smaller organizational context to make it easy, right? At some point, they're going to say, well, let's now bring in our manager who has the credit card and the budget. And that person is just going to, sign up, swipe the credit card, and potentially never be a user of the product. And so that's where this kind of like linear model of like everyone should go through the same steps tends to break down and break apart, and actually can become a problem because I see too many growth teams that are like looking at all their product adoption metrics through this kind of linear lens at the user level rather than really looking at it at the account level. And so one of the analogies that I use to explain this and to get teams thinking and starting to allocate personas to all of this is how the journey in B2B is very similar to the story of the Lord of the Rings. So the Lord of the Rings, for those who don't know, it's a pretty straightforward story. There's what they call a Fellowship of the Ring, which is essentially a group of a few people who decide we have this ring, let's go destroy it. And the whole thing is just their journey towards destroying the ring. What's really interesting is that fellowship all starts together and then they get broken apart. There's some people that end up in one place, some people that end up in other places. And if you remove any of these sub-stories, if you remove any of the characters, the entire story falls apart. Like you cannot just say, hey, all we care about is Frodo, the ring bearer, and he's going to like lead it all the way to Mordor. And then, we're all happy and the world is saved. You have people like Gandalf, who I typically consider the instigator of all of this, kind of like starts the whole thing. He disappears for like half a book. And then he shows back like at a clutch moment to save the day. And if you remove him, like the whole thing falls apart. And then what's even more interesting is you have people even within the fellowship who want to take the ring for themselves. And you'll see this, when companies are trying to buy your product, they are folks who are going to have competing interests. Like they're not super happy about your product going in because, they're fanboys of some other product, or they prefer this other thing. They have a friend who invested in some other thing, and they want to take the project for themselves also because they want to shine, because they have, they need to prove to daddy that they're actually worthy of their love. And I know like this is like there's joke here, but to some extent, people buy products to get promoted, right? Like the reason in B2B people buy products is like to achieve better results in their organization and to make it to the next level of the corporate ladder. I know it's like very like I don't know, kind of ruthless to say, but it is true, right? And so then the question is, how do you just embrace that, be real about it, like factor it into your, marketing personas and start realizing, okay, the journey is not linear. We're going to have people that have competing interests. Like, how do we make sure that we bring them along the way and that we have enough inertia within the account so that at the end, the ring is actually destroyed and that, the hobbits can live happily ever after. So again, I think it's a different way of looking at it, but I think it's a helpful and maybe playful way to think about your personas, anti-personas, and like how some folks might have competing interests, but how you still need them in the overall journey, and convincing them is more important than kind of ignoring them. And so from that, beyond kind of like, it's great to think about it, there's another part, which is now how do you execute against it? We talked about, adapting rather the onboarding to different people. One of the most basic things is making sure that the way you think about the journey for different people is differentiated, right? So if you have a core user, someone you expect to see get value from the product, that person, you want to invite them to get value from the product, to invite more people that would get value from the product, and potentially at some point swipe their credit card, right? That's your hobbits, right? Like one hobbit like brings another hobbit, and then they all go together, and in the end, like that's how they win. But on the flip side, now if you have a buyer who's signing up, the buyer is not going on the same journey. For the buyer, for Gandalf, it's more important to realize what am I trying to accomplish? What are the things I'm going to get from this? And who is the team that I need? And why is this team so important? And so it's more about explaining to them what the value is going to be for the rest of their team rather than what the value is going to be for them. I think, and that's where it can be very frustrating when, as a manager, you log into a tool and all the onboarding is designed as if you were going to be an adopter and a user of the product when you're actually evaluating it for your team. And this is where, again, like the risk is then people are going to, some people are evaluating this for their team. The onboarding is going to be so rough and so feature or like core user centric that they're just not going to buy you because they're not going to understand, like they don't have time to like log into everything, use the features, like put themselves in the shoes of the users to realize, oh yeah, this is valuable. You need to help them understand faster. And so again, highly, highly encouraged to even just like starting point. Don't think about like too many journeys. Don't go like full on Fellowship of the Ring. Start with just two, like core users and like buyers. And think about like, how are those two journeys differentiated today in your product? And I think that is already an awesome starting point, and you will start seeing really, really great results.
I can't get it off this Lord of the Rings analogy, Francis. You start with two. Don't go full Fellowship of the Ring. I think that's good advice. Start with two. That's a good standard. I see a question from Jordan. I'm going to answer in a bit when we get to talking about form fields. There's a tab in the question. So if anybody has questions, drop it in there. We're going to be in Q&A in just a few minutes. I think what's important, so now how do we bring this home? I think it's important for you to, Francis talked about core users and buyers in the last slide, how, start with those two. And really like it's how you start applying this is really trying to understand, that your product has different, there's the core users and buyers. That's, I think, one approach to it. There's also, earlier Francesco asked about customers versus new users. Both of those people have different ways they want to be promoted, as Francis said earlier. What does the promised land look like for them versus the other? And there's also different types of segments when you think about low spenders or high rollers. Like maybe you have a segment that have a higher budget versus one that is lower budget. And a perfect example might be a prosumer product like Dropbox, where on one end you have consumers who are very low willingness to pay versus businesses that are willing to pay per user, and they have a little bit more budget for that. And just to poke fun of like movies, like there's there different fans of uh, of of James Bond. You can have Pierce Brosnan fans versus Daniel Craig fans, and they totally have different needs. Like Pierce Brosnan fans are more suave. I mean, I'm generalizing here, but hopefully you're trying. I'm trying to get at is like your different types of users have different needs and they have different wants. Daniel Craig Bond fans might want more brutal, like beat 'em up, like in your face kind of thing. There's also a good example where I often get asked this, or Ramley, when should I be more hands off with my users, or when should I be more hands on with like product tours and stuff? And that's a good other type of segment that you can approach, where there are more people who love to have more hands-on approach versus ones that are more hands-on off. And you can try to figure that out early on by simply asking them. I think that's the key. To Nick Cage fans are the ones here as well, of course. And really, it's all about like what is their promised land look like? What does success look like? What does getting promoted, whether that's a skill or in the job, look like for them? And really understanding that early on for those types of users. The example that Francis brought up, where core users have different aha moment than a buyer, and Pierce Brosnan fans have a different aha moment than Daniel Craig fans, and existing users have different aha moment than a new user, and really like understanding what that it looks like for them. And the whole question around is like how do you then like personalize the experience? And sometimes simply just asking upfront, like, what is your goal in during the sign up process, can be very helpful with this. Like Twilio is an example here where, what is your goal today? And what I love about this is it's straight up just telling you, hey, we're going to customize your experience. And who doesn't love their experience customized or more like cater towards what they need? We talked about like the decision fatigue and the having too many choices, the paradox of choices. And this is like kind of signaling to them, hey, we're just going to show you exactly what you need. And here are some questions. What is your goal? Are you trying to just launch a project, or you're trying to do this? And I think figuring this out, just talking to a few users or customers would be super, super helpful here. Another question is like, what do you want to start with? I think that's also important with that. And this is another example where like once they know that you have a project, asking upfront like who you are and like what segment or like what function you come from could be very helpful, because like a product person might have different needs than a marketer or like an executive. Where executive, and this is what Francis said, executives and buyers probably care more about like ROI versus like somebody who is in the weeds all the time probably care more about like making sure it's easy to use and I don't have to click a lot of buttons with that. And I think I want to jump into a question here. I'm seeing like some questions flow in, but there was one related to this that Jordan asked, where he asked on the topic of curating onboarding experiences where users care about, how do you how to balance understanding what users want without bombarding them with too many form fields to fill out account creation or onboarding flow? Like it really goes to this. I feel like even for this particularly, there's too many fields. I'm not sure how you feel, Francis. Where like here, like, oh my goodness, it's like 4 things. I'm not sure how this is structured, but like even this might be a little too much. Do you feel the same way, Francis, about this? That it might be a little too much?
I do. I think this one is a really tricky one. I think this is where there's a component of, as much as possible, try to infer what the use case is likely going to be. I think in many cases, companies do a pretty poor job of, so there are 2 answers. One of them is third-party data. It's a pretty obvious one. It's one that most people do. you run enrichment, and then you try to figure out what's the job title. Like most of this you can somewhat get from third-party enrichment. That one is kind of table stakes, but it, there's like issues with fill rate and stuff like that. What I see people not doing well enough is using their first-party data and the previous part of the journey to infer what the use case is likely going to be, right? Most of the time, people before signing up are going to be looking at specific pages. And if your PMMs are doing their job, you have pages that relate to very specific use cases. You actually have a journey that relates to that. And then you might have your demand gen team that's running specific ads for specific pain points. And so when someone is clicking on an ad that relates to a specific pain point, that they look at your website at specific pages that relate to that pain point, that is such rich information about what these users are trying to do. But it is so sad to see how seldom it is used to drive personalization in the onboarding journey. And instead, what we end up doing for the sake of simplicity on our part as software builders is we just like put a bunch of forms and we ask questions. And I think this is something that frustrates me with our industry, where I think we can do better and our customers deserve better than us just asking them. Like they've left a bunch of breadcrumbs all over the place to let us know what problem it is they're trying to solve. And we're not using that. We're just going into like, yo, thanks for showing up. By the way, like, who are you? And like they give you their email, like we have LinkedIn, we can look up who they are and we can look up the size of their company. And then it's the same thing. And then like if you extrapolate that, right, like you're as a product manager or growth person on the call, you probably get frustrated when salespeople don't do that, right? Like if an AE walks into a call for a demo and the first thing they ask the prospects is like, so what do you do at blah, blah, blah? And like, how big is your company? You're like, this is literally information that is available publicly on LinkedIn. Now that seems super obvious because we're looking at other people, but when we look at what we do as growth people, like someone who came through these ads, like it's kind of embarrassing, but almost, right, that we're not using that information to tailor their journey. There are companies that do this really well, but I feel like it's an area where I don't think we're doing a great job as an industry.
Totally with you there. I think even like in the worst case, every field, I forgot what stat I saw, but every field you add on the sign up process reduces their completion rate, like by, I'm just making up numbers now, but it does like 5-10% or something like that, where really like you have to be judicious about the questions you ask. And I think talking about rants, Francis, the other thing that I just gets to me is when they ask a question on the sign up process and they don't use it to customize the experience. Like if you're going to ask a question, please make sure that it helps cater to the experience and personalize it. And an example here is like, hey, if I saw like, what is your goal? And it's like, it's to send SMS. I expect to like be guided to sending the SMS. And I've gone through once before where like, I've given my responses and it still gave me the same experience as that didn't lead me to what I wanted right away. And I think that just like, please, if you ask, make sure you're asking ones that you're going to use to customize the experience, or like it's going to help. I think we have a question later about like salespeople, but it help inform your sales.
And the last one data point I'll share as well, and this is from the team at Jira. When it comes to the UX of what you use to try and answer the questions of what a user is trying to accomplish in the product, what's really interesting is that drop-down menus are pretty terrible in terms of the quality of the inputs that you're going to get from customers. So the team at Atlassian, Jira, basically ran a test where every week they would change the order of the drop-down. And what was interesting was that the first answer of that drop-down always got the same percentage of clicks.
Buddy. Yeah.
No matter what it was, right? So it was really interesting. And that was kind of their way of saying like, wait, are people actually truthfully filling this in? Or are they just like, give me access to the product and just like clicking real quick? And so that was one way to see that. And we saw this also with Pipedrive. Same thing, like pretty high velocity product. And the data that they were getting from this like self-input was pretty terrible. And the problem is like the entire company was looking at this as truth because they were saying, oh yeah, well, this is, data that's coming from our customers. They're self-inputting it, right? Who wouldn't be truthful in doing this?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, people aren't deliberately not trying to be truthful. They're just deliberately trying to get to the product as fast as possible, right? And so I think I will say that that's the Twilio example I think is interesting, because you have these options and you kind of click on one of the boxes. That usually we've seen has a higher accuracy rate than having a drop down where people have to read through the list and generally kind of like click quickly to whatever first value seems somewhat reasonable.
I like that. It goes back to what Scott Belsey said, in the first 15 seconds, new users are lazy, vain, and selfish. They're just choosing the first one. It's the easiest path to resistance, essentially, with that. I love that. And then another example here, I think goes back to what you mentioned. It's like not a drop down. It actually shows you what best describes. I feel like this is another thing that they probably can get through like third party enrichment. Like if they provide their work email, you probably can figure out their SaaS, B2B, non-for-profit. And that information you can use to have, hopefully, like, they have different needs versus one versus the other. And then in terms of using this, I think here's an example of how you can use this for emails and things like that. Francis, you have some.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I thought would be helpful here, again, is just making it concrete. Sometimes, a lot of this might seem very like metaphysical, and it seems like it's like really hard to approach, but it actually isn't, crazy complicated, or you can make it very simple of saying, let's, identify core users and buyers and, let's guess, right? And this is where growth is so interesting, because we're constantly doing hypothesis testing. And so we have a hypothesis that we can identify the right people. We have a hypothesis that if we send them a more personalized or more highly contextualized email, that we are going to get a higher response rate, a higher adoption rate. And so this is just like one very simple example of saying, this is an example of Cloud App. They're kind of you can think of them as a Loom competitor. They were an early Loom in the market. So one of the things that they did is that if someone was signing up and, was more clearly a user of the product, they would try and infer what is the likely use case of this person. So in this case, like someone from sales is signing up. If you're in sales, the reason you would use some like video recording is to communicate at a higher bandwidth than email, right? There's a lot more that you can share in a recorded video that you could over email. So that's the use case, right? And so that's what we're pitching in the product. And we're telling you, hey, this is how you're going to get value, is by recording a quick video or recording a GIF and sending it to a prospect. However, now if you have a CEO of a larger organization signing up, they, potentially there's a use case for them to record stuff and send it to team. But in their case, they were saying, look, like we're not seeing necessarily CEOs adopt this. So it's more a matter of how their entire organization can become more efficient, because their communication, or the bandwidth of their communication, is going to increase because we're giving them a new tool to communicate a lot more information in a short amount of time. And that's really the problem that as a tool we are solving for organizations, is making sure that, CS and engineering are communicating, faster, that sales is able to communicate with their sales team. And as a CEO, you should care about this. So it's a very, very different kind of pitch, where we're not pitching you why this is relevant to you directly. We're pitching why it's relevant to your team, which then is relevant to you. So I think, again, like thinking about it in like fairly simple terms, I would highly recommend you get started with something as basic, or it seems as basic as this. And then once you have kind of those two tracks, then you can start going more and more granular. I think it's really important not to get the kind of analysis paralysis problem where you end up, not doing anything. Again, back to the paradox of choice, right? It's like, oh, where do I start? Which personas do I start with? And I think just going with the like core user and buyer, that's like a very easy starting point. And then you can go more granular. So hopefully this is helpful. We have a bunch of other templates that I'm more than happy to share with anyone who's interested, but wanted to at least have one more tactical out here.
I love this. I think this is related to one of the questions actually from Meg, and it's related to how do you view PLG in collaboration with sales-led onboarding, blended approach. Particularly, I think this is a great example where it seems like this is a salesperson reaching
Mhm.
out to this is like a sales outreach. Is there anything you wanted to add here? How sales can be added into the whole product led onboarding flow, Francis?
This is super interesting. And Meg, this is where I would recommend if, first off, if you're struggling to get your team internally to understand how important the role of sales is in this, again, I'll pitch April Dunford's book once more. But I think one of the big things that, she pushes on is that today the journey to buy a product is really difficult for a potential buyer. There's so many choices out there, so much risk in making one decision or another. And so the role of sales here is to help de-risk and to help make it easier for them to buy. And so a big part of that is understanding how both the sales team can help, but like pitching is one thing, but probably not enough, right? Because like a tool like Travel Perk, like maybe they get it, but you want to see the product. And so there's an element of allowing people to use the tool and to see how, not like besides what the rep is saying, how easy it actually is to make travel booking faster and better. And so I think ultimately to me, like sales and product kind of, again, like play their role together, and the importance of each in the journey should be pretty different, right? Like sales definitely incredibly important in the buyer lane, and a lot less, I would say, in the core user lane. In the core user lane, I think sales should be acting as a support person or a product expert. On the buyer side, they should really be pitching the higher level value proposition, but also the differentiator, which is like another point that April makes, is like today there's so much software. As Roundly was saying, it's super easy to produce software. So today, understanding what is your differentiator, why is your product different, like what is your take that's so different, is something that the rep has to be able to convey to the potential buyer. And ideally, the product onboarding conveys to the user, but it might be less important to them.
That makes sense. There's also the question around like when, there's another great example where a core user versus a buyer. A buyer might like want more of like a sales touch approach where they're shown the ROI and stuff like that, versus like a core user might want to self-educate. I know I'm generalizing, but like that's what we found, where like buyers are like, just show me the money, man. Versus the core users just like, let me self-educate and learn how to use this. And when enough core users have been on and trying it out, like there's a tipping point. This is what Slack saw, where the approach was like, if enough users from the same company signs up for it, then maybe it's time to send a sales executive or a sales-led motion to the buyer or to the exec who has a credit card to like reach out and potentially, hey, you have 20 people from your company who's using our tool. Here's what your benefits are if you upgrade to a paid plan.
Right. Maybe one thing that I will say that I think has changed this past year, if you look at 2021 and before, right, most ICs within an organization had a credit card and were able to spend a fairly high amount on that credit card. Now what we're seeing is that anything that's like above 30K and even in a 25K range, we're starting to see CFOs actually like look at that spend. So I think it's really critical also to realize that in a lot of cases, and this is where to Francesco's point, right, like your ACV is critical here to determine like how the sell is going to happen. But I think I would consider whenever you're above 25K, you're going to need a sales rep to go and close that deal. And now the question is really, how does the product-led experience of users help make that decision? I think the day of the pure bottom-up sell of like the individual users are like swiping their credit cards all over the place, and it like becomes like massively adopted as a tool. I am not sure that's going to be the case that much. I do think, however, that going to the buyer with information about the users getting value from the product is definitely going to help your sales cycle. And so I'm a big believer that like kind of cold outbound is dead. I haven't heard a single company lately tell me that cold outbound is like working as well as before for them. And this is where I think like outbounding the buyer, using information about the users and the value they're getting, that is still something that is incredibly relevant and incredibly performant. So maybe Meg, like the thing I'll say is that, yeah, to me, the PLG motion really, really helps provide more context for the sales-led part of the deal, right? And like reps are still going to maybe have to like cold outbound the buyer, but the account itself is not cold because we have users who have interacted with stuff, and that context is incredibly helpful to make sure the rep is walking in knowing, like having something interesting to say, which I think today is probably the hardest part, right? Like few people have interesting things to say.
It's so true. I think, I think having more contextual information, like you mentioned, can really like help capture attention of buyers. If you could provide like, oh, your users are doing this, then it's easier for them to reply rather than like a templated email approach with that. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think that's what we wanted to share, but like we wanted to leave enough time. We have 6 minutes for Q&A. We've been answering questions throughout this, so if anybody has any further questions, we'd love to hear it in the chat. And Meg, thank you for that question. Francesco, thank you so much for providing your thoughts around the ACV for that. While people are coming up with questions, any final suggestions or tips, Francis, that you want to give out to folks as we go into the Q&A here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is, like a very generic one, but lead with empathy. Try to think about how would you want to be treated as a new user of the product, and really again, like thinking about, is this an IKEA onboarding or is this a Amazon onboarding? Or actually, the example I wanted to pick when you were showing it, right? You showed Clippy. I think one of the big successes of the last few years, ChatGPT, I think what was incredible about ChatGPT was the UX and the onboarding. Super fast, right? Like time to value was incredible. You signed up, you typed something in there, and like you saw text appearing. It was like magic, right? Like that, like time, like one of the shortest time to value we've seen in a B2C product. And even from a B2B perspective, like people being able to do competitive analysis and uploading pictures from G2 Crowd and getting a summary of the G2 reviews, like that time to value is incredible. And I think that's something we should all aspire to in terms of how simple our onboardings are.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think I just want to double click on what you said earlier around don't make it like Fellowship of the Ring right away. I think it can get easy to be over-engineer your segmentation. We're like, oh man, we can do like by job title and ACV and like all of this stuff. But like if you start off with just one in the beginning, maybe focus on goals or like focus on core users versus buyer and really like prove that out. I think that would go a long way rather than like going absolutely nuts with different set, because there's many ways you can slice and dice this, and like figuring out exactly what's going to work for your business could be super definitely easy to understand. Oh, and Francis, thank you for the link there.
Of course.
Any final questions from anybody? If not, we've added our LinkedIn. Feel free to add us. We're happy to answer any questions. But I think if there's no other questions, going once, going twice, going three times. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you're calling from. Francis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. And as we mentioned, more than happy to continue the conversation offline.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll send the recording and the slides after. So thank you. Have a good night, morning, afternoon, wherever you're from today.
Later.
All right. Bye.